I think this is key. It's the power of attention. And this is something which one should experiment and explore with, but it's, I think, something verifiable and repeatable. For me, that's why it makes it more in a scientific domain, although it has to do with your inner life. Exercise the power of attention and recognize there's two types of attention. There's voluntary and involuntary attention. You have to first exercise voluntary attention in order to discover the involuntary attention. But basically, if your attention can be sustained in the present moment for long enough, two things happen. One thing is the ego identity starts to dissolve and loosen its bonds. And another thing is the mind starts to become more tranquil and equanimous. That's when you're active in your mind and body, but also responding intuitively.
Hello everyone and welcome to Blue Hour Podcast, where we explore the minds and the worlds of visionary artists and creators. This week's episode we have my spiritual guide that I've been working with the past 5-6 years. His name is Amir Mourad, and he's also a very talented guitarist, musician, and about to release his new album. So you're going to see from this podcast, he has lots of insights and has a very, grounded approach to spirituality, very practical approach. So there's a lot of golden nuggets in this episode. You're going to see a lot of valuable insights that can help you on your own spiritual journey as well. So pay attention, and I hope you guys enjoy. So welcome, Amir. Thanks for accepting.
Hi, thanks. Nice to see you. It's been a long time since we saw each other.
Yeah, I was traveling, and we've last time was about a year ago, I think.
Right.
Yeah. So there's infinite topics we could talk about, because I know the depth of everything you do is like there's like infinite things we can just open up. But I think we could start just by exploring your music, because that's a big part of your life. It's also what you studied in McGill in composition, and now you just started to teach as well music. But I think what I'm most fascinated to learn about is your approach to music, like as maybe a medium to communicate something that you're experiencing within, and how you translate that in your music. Like any insights you've had into the creative process, because music is such an abstract art, so it requires some abstract method to produce it.
Yeah, my history with music goes even further before any meditation or like conscious spiritual exploration. I'd say it was probably my first efforts in some form of some kind of self-knowledge, perhaps in a more indirect way, because I took some lessons, guitar lessons and so on, but a good chunk of it was self-taught. Spending a lot of time just getting to know my body, how the instrument feels, what music turns me on, what music doesn't turn me on, and not even knowing for what reasons these things are attractive. Yeah. So it's been very, I suppose if there's a common thread between the musical side of the exploration and the spiritual side, I guess I can sum it up by being guided by a certain intuition. Okay. And that's certainly a common thread that I've seen running through both. At this stage in my life, I really don't see music as being divorced from spiritual exploration or self-knowledge. They're kind of one and the same thing. I suppose with music and just the art in general, you're taking that process, and whether you know it or not that you're involved in that process, you're making something physical and tangible out of it, which other people can witness and experience. And if one day this body perishes, you have these snapshots of these different eras of one's life and what they mean and what you're going through, and sometimes you don't even know what you're trying to express. I guess that's also part of the intuitive expression. You don't know sometimes why you're expressing the things that you do, but once the process comes to completion, then you look back on it in hindsight, then the meaning becomes more clear and apparent. It's almost like, I don't want to call it a therapy session, but there can certainly be like some therapeutic aspects to it.
Because I know in that album that you've been working on, and I even did the album cover, and it's gonna come out soon. But I know that there's some tracks that were from your past life, like that were from a few years ago that you put on the album, and some that are new creations. I'm wondering, like, was there any insights when you see them all together in one like entity, which is the album, like how they communicate to each other?
Yeah, most of the songs were written around the same area of time. One song though, it's the song I chose to start the record with. It's called The Dark Bardo. And that song goes back maybe 15 years. There's no rocks. I guess it's closer to contemporary classical music than it is to like rock or metal or fusion music. Because I wanted, even back then I didn't know why I wrote this song, but I suppose I was expressing a certain unresolved darkness that I felt very distinctly. And I was sitting there at the computer doing the programming, and instead of sitting and improvising on an instrument, I would come, because that's improvisation is basically spontaneous composition. But I was improvising with the software in front of me and the notation and everything, and I didn't know how it was going to turn out. So this is like another one of those examples. So now I think the meaning of it is that I'm starting the album as a word of warning. It's a warning that, you know, we're going to get into some serious stuff here, and some of it might be destabilizing and difficult to process. You're going to have to go on this journey where you will confront these different parts of your shadow, and it's not necessarily going to be pleasant, and it's not always going to be unpleasant. There's going to be a cycle in play here.
So in a certain way, it was the beginning of your spiritual journey in your own personal life, and in the album it stretches out to like from that time to now.
Exactly. It's like that's like a snapshot of me groping in the darkness, trying to find some way forward where some spark of light can be uncovered. So I thought that's, given how different of an individual I was back then, and all the compositions that followed after that, which were more recent and more representative of where I've been for the last couple of years, I felt it was a nice contrast.
Because like as a painter, like, and you know it, like my art has transformed into like a tool for introspection, into a tool for manifestation. And so I'm wondering, like, through your path, you said that there is, if there is a difference, it's very subtle about like how the art of creation transforms into your real life, into your inner world. What is something, a big change that has happened through music that has influenced your reality and your way of life, almost like through insights or through like...
Okay, I should say that there was a long period of time where I just abandoned everything related with art and music. I became totally inactive. I wasn't playing on the guitar. These were the years when I really wanted to have some clarity into the workings of my own mind, and also resolving certain things that were not really dealt with properly from childhood. Years worth of certain tension and just being preoccupied with your environment without properly looking within. So during that time, that's when I started plunging myself in more spiritual exploration, a lot of meditation and research and learning from scriptures, getting initiated into certain techniques and then refining and cultivating them.
How old were you?
A lot of self-observation during this process, trying to find a way to also make meditation something that can be integrated as part of the flow of everyday life. So I basically became quite a hermit during this period. This was like my project. I was having a bit of foresight, thinking that how do I want to live for the rest of my life, basically. And I had this suffering, short attention span. I had an ADHD from younger. Then that combined with depression, and then contemplations on death, and all of these things were like colliding together. Plus this little element of, because I lived a good part of my life in the Middle East and my family was moving around constantly, I suppose there was an element of social isolation, which could really impact you if you find that you're a sensitive kind of individual. I felt from a very young age that I had this intuitive sensitivity that I didn't know how to make sense of it.
And would that be connected with the moon in Pisces?
I
A
don't know
reflective, yeah, I think it would be this, because we just looked at your chart briefly before, and
yeah.
the moon in Cancer in Pisces can give this hypersensitive reflectivity, because you reflect everything in the known and unknown reality.
Perhaps. I don't know much about astrology, as you know.
Yeah, but I think it
But
could be.
I know that whether one believes in that thing or not, I think it's useful to have aids that can serve as contemplative devices. So we did like a little mini contemplation together. Yeah, perhaps. I was definitely like, I didn't have the tools or the knowledge to properly internalize my attention and look at the mind itself. I was very preoccupied by my environment, but I didn't know how to make sense of this intuitive sensitivity. So I just let it guide me in terms of how I would be flowing in the outside world. And music was something I guess it's the mixture of that intuitive sensitivity along with randomness and chance. Because I'm not sure if I didn't come across my sister's music collection that I may have ever started like plunging deeper into music. I just happened to, and that's the fascinating thing, that if you have like this, I suppose like that intuitive sensitivity, you don't know what can affect you. And sometimes the smallest things can set you off on a totally different trajectory.
I'm wondering what is intuition for you? Because everyone has different interpretations of it. Where do you feel it? Like, how does it communicate to you? What is it for you? What is intuition for you?
I'll put it in more, for what I see as more psychological terms. For me, it's opening channels of communication between the conscious and the unconscious. Some people might think of it more like there's an intuition that can be super conscious, so you have your normal conscious baseline, and then you have regions that can be above ordinary consciousness and regions that can be below ordinary consciousness. So that could be another interpretation.
So intuition is linking with different realms that you're not aware of, whether they're super conscious, unconscious, or...
Sure. However you look at it, I think one thing that you can definitely say is that it's some sort of intelligence that's more aligned with the most authentic parts of your being, and therefore it speaks. It's compelled to speak with the voice of truthfulness. It's only the question of, are you able to listen to it? And
yeah, and for you, it was a tool that has been guiding you even when you were younger and suffering more.
I think so. I think it guides most artistic types, or even people who are born with a certain gift and feels like that gift is not something that's truly of their doing, but something that's, let's say, far more ancient, or something inherited, and you're just a vehicle through which these things are being expressed.
Yeah.
Which explains things like child prodigies and people who are also gifted in, let's say, scientific thinking or mathematics.
Yeah. And also, like, a lot of spiritual paths, they describe the unconscious and the conscious merging as the integrative. How do Jung name it? Like this.
Individuation?
Individuation. It's kind of connecting making your intuition almost conscious, so that.
Yes. Well, I should say that another common thread, I think, is because when you're dealing with art, right? And also to some extent the sciences, to a large extent the sciences, you're working with your imagination. And imagination is another powerful vehicle through which the intuition can be expressed. So there's to So for example, if you you enter into a dream and let's say you hear a piece of music, which sometimes that has happened to me, I feel like I'm actually uncovering music that's written by somebody else.
Yeah.
And it's even sometimes appeared in a way that seems like already formed and complete. And it's like with very little stages of development. It's just something you hear, and it's like, I guess it's maybe related to this idea of spontaneous creation. So maybe your unconscious is spontaneously creating while you're in a dream.
But it has happened to you that you've pulled it out of the dream and put it into like physical music?
I try to do that quickly.
Yeah, because you want to remember it.
Because sometimes it's hard to retain it. Well, that's why also like learning to be meditative in such a way that you can enter a dream and still be meditative can be beneficial. Or learning things like lucid dreaming.
Yeah.
Because then it uncovers, I guess, a more direct relationship with the contents of the unconscious.
And I feel like these encounters and dreams, especially since you're a musician, and it's almost like whatever is communicated through your subconscious is communicating in your language, which is music. I feel like it might just be like a piece of a puzzle that kind of opens up something for you in your life. Did you see a relationship when these things happen and all of a sudden this music kind of makes you resonate in another frequency that opens up something for you in your life? Almost like a gift that's just that's something you needed.
Oh, for certain, yeah. Because you're opening those channels of communication between the conscious and the unconscious. If you give it full expression, it can be extremely purifying. You can feel like there's this, you're getting purged by the process. And there it is, documented in a tangible way. And because you're actually going through the process while you're documenting it, there's this raw authenticity that people can participate in and experience, and perhaps it can inspire them in certain ways. So certainly once it feels like it's out of the system, you have this sense like, okay, that message is complete. It's time to move on to some other type of exploration. But once something is complete, you know it's complete.
Yeah, it feels like you're ready for another chapter. And in this same vein, like hearing and dreams, you know how like we have 5 senses, some say we have more, but we also have these same senses within the imagination, within dreams. How do you explain this? Like imagine like smelling this frequency that you would smell like in a fruit that you're just opening up, and then the same thing you can experience mentally. Like what is do you think there's something to pull out of this? You know, I know in certain traditions you would use these inner senses to help you transform your reality in some ways. What is your relationship, or how would you explain this in your own terms?
You mean how one can cultivate these inner senses?
How can we take advantage of this to, I don't know, for prayer, for meditation, for awakening certain faculties that are hidden within us? How can we take advantage of this imagination and all that exists? Almost like the same reality that exists in our waking life exists in our dreaming life.
Correct. That is also fascinating.
Yeah.
That, you know, we're sleeping for 1/3 of our life. Average lifespan, let's say 70 years, so 25 years, either in dream or dreamless sleep. That's a whole shadow life hidden in darkness. And because we don't remember the majority of our dreams, when we come to our waking state, sometimes we underestimate how the content of what we're experiencing during the night can set off tendencies that influence you even in your waking state, going about doing ordinary things. So certainly I think the productive thing, which is one thing I like about the Tibetan dream yoga, is that they're seeking to maximize the moments when you can be meditative, regardless of whether you're in the waking state or the dream state, or even to the extent of going to sleep, where there's no dream at all, but it becomes, I know it sounds a bit unusual, but a conscious sleep. Pretty much equivalent to what yogic tradition speaks of as samadhi.
Do you have an experience like that you could talk about, where you have been conscious in your sleep, and then when you wake up, you pull out this information into your awakened state?
I don't want to talk too metaphysical.
Why not?
I guess sometimes you have certain types of dreams that seem like premonitions, and then it's hard to know exactly how these things work and how they function. But like I said, I think our unconscious, that there are truths that exist in the deep regions of the mind which sometimes express themselves, but you're not listening. So yeah, sometimes I'll go into a dream and it seems like, let's say, something specific is going to happen, and then it happens.
Example, we want like a real example.
Okay, well, like an example, okay, maybe this is also related, because with music. So I had this one specific dream. Okay, you take everything with a grain of salt, and this is just my subjective interpretation. So I had a dream, the silver guitar, which I think is out of view from the camera, in the red case there. So that guitar, I entered the dream and I just saw it in a black vastness of space, and it was hanging in space. And it was rotating. And it was rotating while transmitting a message. And it's not a message that I heard. There was no voice. It was just something understood.
Like a knowing, instant knowing.
Yeah, just an instant knowing that this is the message. And the rotation was like the transmission of that message. So it was saying, I'm here, I'm nearby, be present, be awake. That's what it was saying.
Like the music or the guitar?
No, the guitar. It's physical presence. So then I woke up very shortly after that. It was the morning. I go onto social media, and on my Facebook profile, an old friend, he was an American, we went to school together. Hadn't talked to him for several years. It was maybe 8 years, 8 to 10 years, something like this. And he says, "Oh, look what I found." And he posted a photo of me in his house holding that guitar. So did I dream about it because it's going to happen, or is it going to happen because you dream about it? Or is this all just merely a massive coincidence? Either way, sometimes when these things happen in recurring patterns, not just a one-off, it might be indicative of something that's worth attention. So that's how forming these deeper connections, I think, can influence one's life, is because we're having these signals all the time about what we need to pay attention to, what areas of our inner being need healing and recognition. And I trust the reality of the unconscious. It has a nagging force. Whatever is unresolved is going to find its ways to recycle it and bring it over to the surface. And that's why so many people repeat the same errors and mistakes and cycles and go through the same cycles of suffering. So I suppose you're learning an art of conscious suffering. For me, that's what part of what it is. It's, if you're going through some suffering, make it a conscious process.
Through your art.
Yes. And a good way is to also make it tangible.
Yeah, we were talking about that earlier, but I do realize that often, at the beginning of our career, whatever our medium is, our medium will serve as a mirror. Whatever we create will serve the purpose of showing us who we are right now, so that we can see more deeply what needs to be healed. And then, but I feel like at some point there's like a shift, there's a line that's drawn. Okay, this is the ego is more under control. It is not controlling your life anymore. Because you've healed all the things that make you like egotistical and think about yourself first. And then there's the the other part where now you're still doing art, but then the shift is like, okay, well, if it's not talking about me, if I'm not thinking about me while I'm making it, and I'm trying to be more of a medium, a channel for some higher creativity to come through me, and then it becomes something else. Like the outcome is something completely different. It can look the same, but it feels different.
There are those type of artists who are so attached to a certain identity that everything that flows through them is defined by that identity. Like let's say the tortured artist syndrome.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
So I think I know a solution to how we can because I know we're talking things, I don't want to make what we're talking about too abstract, so perhaps we can make some practical conversation. I think this is key. It's the power of attention. And this is something which one should experiment and explore with, but it's, I think, something verifiable and repeatable, which for me, that's why it makes it more in a scientific domain, although it has to do with your inner life. It's exercise the power of attention and recognize there's two types of attention. And much of what we're exploring through meditation and mindfulness has to do with this. There's voluntary and involuntary attention. So you have to first exercise voluntary attention in order to discover the involuntary attention. But basically, if your attention can be sustained in the present moment for long enough, two things happen. One thing is the ego identity starts to be diluted, it starts to dissolve and loosen its bonds. And another thing is the mind starts to become more tranquil and equanimous. Zen refers to this as the no-mind state. It's when you're in that state of, let's call it the zone, right? And that's when you're active in your mind and body, but also responding intuitively. When you can be fully aware but without attachment to the mental projections, because it's the attachment to the mental projections that solidify that egoistic force. And that ego is really what's standing as an enormous barrier between your immediate conscious experience and these deeper regions of the psyche. So you see this like in Japanese culture, right? These principles of Zen have been infiltrated all over the place. So you have like this Zen paintings with calligraphy, you have archery, swordsmanship, how you arrange things in a room to make it elegant, and preserving principles like simplicity and spontaneity and emptiness as well.
But are you like saying that for like, let's say anyone that feels like their art becomes about their suffering because they are suffering, that perhaps a solution to that is like meditation and contemplation, or different techniques to do before creating?
That is desirable, that you have like it's extremely helpful to have a formal practice that can complement informal things. But for whatever reason, if one is unable to initiate some regular formal discipline, I would say whatever you do, try to do it with attention. If you're going to dance with attention. If you're going to play music, try to be attentive to how your body's feeling, everything that's going on in your inner space.
Like mindfulness.
Correct.
That is more the mainstream name for it. Is
Correct.
Like mindfulness practices.
Exercise your attention in the present for long enough, and then you're going to find yourself entering these spaces where a greater naturalness takes over. And you have this balanced combination of control combined with naturalness. Because if you don't have any control, you don't have any technique at all. And we need technique in order to deliver our message, and it's the vehicle through. You need some degree of technique, whatever you do. Even if it's very primitive technique, like with naive art, right? You can just be like a child and improvise. But even that is a certain type of technique. So we can't do without technique, but we also can't be overly technical in a way that it interrupts that naturalness. So the solution, I believe, is to combine those two forces together. And that's when you're in that creative, intuitive space. And you could learn it doing anything. Washing dishes, gardening. It's really anything you approach with the necessary awareness can become part of this alchemy. So it's especially though helpful when you find something that you're passionate about, because what the mind finds attractive, it's a lot easier to get absorbed and immersed into.
I think that's good advice for anyone that feels identified with their suffering. Like maybe that serves you to create about it, like sometimes it creates something beautiful as well. But yeah, I think it's important also to think about.
Can you relate to these things, like in your art?
Yeah, like my first series was unconscious metaphor of me suffering, I guess. It was like using the metaphor of the home, the house, architecture as the body. And then I started to understand that like the way I depicted this architecture was always like broken windows and like a bit like the paint drooling down the sides of the building. And so I began to notice, okay, well, this is what I'm creating. This is where I was when I created, because it happened a bit after I created them, like a year after I went back to study my past art to start noticing this.
Okay, so just out of curiosity, so the way you've created art with painting, because it's very obviously very visual, have you known the kind of creativity where you're building something gradually, brick by brick, and the idea is not fully formed, but the vision is there? Yeah. Or have you also had instances where the whole thing appears to you ready-made and complete, and then you just have to translate
That's
it?
a good question.
So, for example, the reason why I say this is the cover of the album, which is really like very nice, refined, and detailed. The image I had for that, which you helped me materialize, I was just exercising outdoors, I was totally unexpected, and I just saw this image, spontaneous, and it was ready-made and complete. Yeah, sure, there were like some variables which we did some touch-ups on, but the most important elements were there. And actually, when I first received that image, first of all, I had no idea what it meant. And secondly, I didn't see it in the form of a painting. The image that I saw it's a real photo. And when you look at the album cover, you see like, it's this idea of symmetry. It ties into this idea of hanging in the balance, tension between the conscious and the unconscious, and confronting your shadow and dealing with these conflicting polarities within yourself, all that sort of thing. So the series of animals, right, on one side, and then on the other side, and then you have this what I think of it as the wish-fulfilling tree, this multi-dimensional tree of creativity that has all these different fruits, and they're all symmetrically placed in the same regions and so on. Like all of that, I received it ready-made, but I wanted it to be originally a real photograph. But then I thought, I don't have the technical facility, first of all, to be able to make this a reality myself. And it's practically inconvenient to get all these animals together and have them stand. And then where the hell are you going to find a mammoth, you know? So next best thing I thought is talk to Alex. And
that was a fun project. That's one of my favorite things to do, is like working with artists. Like you had the vision already, you had like some of the music done, and then combining your vision of it, your music, and then like putting it in the oven of my mind and coming out with like the aesthetic, like creating a mock-up first and then painting it. That's like the best thing for me.
But you can relate to that, like receiving an idea that's almost fully complete.
And you know what, I think that these fully completed images that you just become a medium for, they come once your focus changes about creating art for the sake of selling it, popularity, all those things. And when it shifts towards like receiving divine guidance or becoming a vessel for something else, that's when I started to see like actual complete paintings, like my painting The Tower. I saw it in a meditation, sketched it out, not to forget the details, the placement, did a mock-up of it, like I even did 3D scaling for the light and everything, and then analyzed it afterwards to understand what it represented. And when I did analyze it, I started to notice that it was not about me. It was about something we were collectively going through, the tower, which is the archetype in the tarot of the personality, the collective personality, the collective program that is not working anymore, and that even though there's fire at the base of the tower, you cannot go. There's no more place to hide. The fire is coming and you have to jump off. And that's kind of what we're going through right now. And it's still communicating a lot of things to me. So that's interesting because, like, in your album, maybe you have both, right? Like you have the beginning, maybe it was more of a expression of what you were going through. And then did you have any like pre-downloaded songs that were just kind of hinted to you through your intuition and that you just converted to physical music?
You mean carried over from before? For
Like,
years or in the moment?
I'm just saying, like, your album, since it's from, you have music from it that's from 15 years ago.
Just one song.
Oh, just one song?
Yeah.
And the others are all pretty much recent?
Yes.
Okay, so in these recent ones, were there some that you had to go in deep meditation to compose so that they would become
No, never.
So what is your creative process in this album?
A lot of it depends on improvisation. So sometimes I'll just be sitting with the instrument, and that's one way that ideas come to me. I just kind of I pay attention to my mood in the moment, and I just kind of let my fingers go where they want to go. And if you're being authentic with the process and really listening to your internal state, things start to get expressed. And then most of the time, basically, I think my main method is so much depends on improvisation. And then you capture, it's like fishing, you capture these seeds. And then maybe a more analytical part of the mind takes over and kind of fleshes it out a little bit and says, okay, maybe, we can change this chord with this chord, or use these notes instead of these notes.
It's many steps to arrive to the final track.
Yes, but oftentimes I'm with my instrument at the computer and I'm letting the song, I'm recording and writing simultaneously. And those are not two separate processes.
Okay.
And that's kind of what captures a lot of the spontaneity and the authenticity. I know some people, they write music in a completely different way. They'll sit in a room and then they'll write the song and they'll flesh it out and so on. And then they'll go to the recording stage.
Yeah.
But oftentimes for me, at least for this record, those two things have been almost simultaneous.
And what would be the
it really is in the heat of the moment, composing spontaneously. And there's such a sheer volume of ideas that sometimes I feel overwhelmed. It's like I need to take a break and just give my mind some space, because there's no way I can possibly capture this volume of ideas. And sometimes the ideas aren't even like necessarily aligned with the project. It could be something that's like, sure, maybe it's related in a less direct way, but stylistically and when it comes to how an album is structured, it just doesn't fit.
Okay.
So sometimes that's another way I'll compose. Like I won't have a song that's fully fleshed, just seeds, and I'll take out my phone and I'll record, like, let's say, a little guitar riff or an idea. And then I have these files in my phone. So that's another way that I compose. And then there's the more traditional way of writing the notation, which sometimes happens. And then receiving sometimes in an altered state of consciousness, like a dream, or let's say in deep meditation, you hear something. And sometimes ideas flow that way. So it's pretty varied, but I think the most common method for me is perform and compose at the same and record at the same time.
Yeah. So it keeps like a rawness to it, like it's in the moment. Because other than like living like a month between the creation of it and the post-prod and then the recording. And
so that means that a lot of the time what starts off as a demo becomes the final thing.
Yeah. And what does this serve like for in your process? What does this bring out, like in the final product?
I think it preserves like I said, a rawness and naturalness. If some people, they'll record the demo and then they'll try to replicate it in the studio, but it's harder to do when you have like such a volume of ideas that are coming to you. You feel like you just want to capture it as quickly as possible.
But I feel like from listening to your music, you can sense that, because you really bring people on a journey that is not static, you know. There is like an emotion and then it goes down into an abyss and then it kind of comes back out. But you can feel this mentality in it, almost this spaciousness of what you're just describing there, where as you're composing it, your mind is bringing you somewhere else and then somewhere else, and that's what you feel in this. It creates almost like a story through your music, a narration. There's an unconscious narration, it seems like, in it.
That's true, like a free form. Some of the songs are more free form instead of like section A, section B, repeat section A. Yeah. And there's a couple of defined sections like this, but the tricky thing is you don't want chaos to prevail, because otherwise it loses the spirit of the message and it doesn't feel like a coherent piece of work. But somehow I just let the intuition run and it ends up being a coherent piece of work, even though sometimes the form is a bit more loose.
Yeah. And for this specific album, what is the cohesive glue that glues all the tracks together?
A sense of a lot of space, because it's heavily orchestrated. Every song is like really orchestrated. Because sometimes you listen closely and there are these little miniature sounds that you're just picking up subliminally, but they're there in the background and they have a psychological effect. So it's like these layers. It feels like almost like there are several interpenetrating worlds, like several planes blended together and makes this cohesive whole. And so I don't know why I write music that way. It just, I feel like that just comes naturally, to create a sense of space where there's ambience, but there's also, my vision was to combine atmosphere and ambience with high level of musicianship and technicality as well.
But probably is you compose this way because you also are this way, in the sense like if you feel connected to different, if you have worked with your unconscious mind and through your conscious awareness, you have these different levels that are communicating at all times. So when you compose naturally, they also this also organically comes through.
Right.
Which can be like, when you listen to your music, it can be like, whoa, like it's a big, it's a lot to absorb, and then you start to pay attention to the intricacies of the thing, and it becomes like almost like your mind has to kind of expand into the spaciousness of the music for you to fully integrate it and digest this dimension you're creating.
Right.
Yeah.
And another theme was contrast. To put anything into perspective, holistic, you need contrast. So you need insight into darkness to have insight into light, and vice versa. And those two things cannot exist without each other. So I felt this it's not something I thought too hard about or made like a plan, but I knew that that's the direction I want to go. I want to create this sense of tension between polarities, and then how you build tension to a climax and then let it resolve, and then you feel, this is the calm that comes after the storm. And that's kind of what it's like to confront your shadow. You're purging these darker elements and it takes you through a turbulent period, and most of, I think of it as cycles of transformation are going to involve that. Like there's this initial phase, and then there's this struggle phase, and then there's this resurrection phase.
The Isis, Osiris.
Yeah, it's like that teaching we looked into, like that trinity of Isis, Osiris, and the baby Horus. The father, the mother. Or also, no, it was also the one with Typhon, right? Isis, Typhon.
And isn't the INRI too?
Yes, in that more esoteric sense. So like the cycle of transformation has become complete, and so that's musically it was an artistic way to express that cycle, and it taught me a lesson that this is a cycle that you visit and revisit if you're really keen about continuous growth of wisdom and learning, that it's a cycle you visit time and time again.
But I feel that there's other, like the music itself is teaching you, but also the process of creating and releasing it seems to be teaching you stuff about yourself as well. Like
sure.
The act of like, this is like your child that you're birthing.
Yes.
And like wanting it to have all the nutrients it needs before being left in the world.
True. And there's also new things one learns technically and practically, because I practically did everything. I did the vocals, I did the bass, I did the rhythm and the lead guitars, I did all the programming. Just the drums was done by somebody else. And few guest musicians playing different instruments. And then the mixing was largely my work as well. Just the mastering I left to somebody else because I don't have enough knowledge and experience in that area. So it was a learning curve too. It's like besides writing this, so besides writing that, you're learning about production and how to create a cohesive project every stage of the way. And then learning about what areas really need to be developed and taking the time and patience to equip yourself with that knowledge. So I would be like going online and listening to instructional videos about mixing and reading literature and books on the subject. So it's more, certainly there's that inner spiritual dimension of it, but there's also that very technical, practical aspect, which is like at the end of the day, you need a final product.
Yeah, but like in real life too, like it's the same patterns, right? If you co-create a child with someone, like it is, it's kind of the same act of creation, of creativeness, where you birth something and then you like see it grow, and you have to at some point detach from it, like when it's old and it's getting all the nutrients and the nurturing it needs. I feel like there's even in painting, like you create a painting, at first you're super attached to it because it's still communicating to you, it's still teaching you stuff, and at some point when you feel, in my experience, when you feel like you've experienced what it has to teach you, then it's easier to let it go and sell it. With music too, like your whole album that you spend so much time and effort and all those worlds you've been through as you were composing it, it's like, okay, this is, in some ways it's part of you, and then you have to put it together and let it go. It's like a big
yes, true.
In English, when you have to let it go, like when someone dies, you have to mourn it. So it is, especially if you're doing all the parts of it, so you're committed and invested in all the little details of it, makes it even more hard to like let it.
And to also be in a headspace where you're involved in this act of creation without any consideration of how it's going to be received or interpreted. Because sometimes your insecurities can flare up and say like, okay, are people going to dig this? And well, maybe this track is going to be a hit, maybe that track is not going to be a hit, which rarely happened to me when I was writing this. But that's when you know you're in a very authentic space, and I think that's what people are looking for. They're looking for a genuine, authentic expression that can only be expressed from this particular individual through this particular mind and body, and that's it's the journey of the artist.
But I do feel on a larger scale also, that's what Earth needs. And this, if Earth is a body, it needs each of us individual to express what only us we can express, for it to be harmonious, for every piece of the puzzle to work in synchronicity.
Even if it's the same truth, let's say, that's realized, it still needs to be, it's going to be expressed through this particular conditioning, through this particular programming, right? So you have this, I guess, maybe you can think of it as this mixture of objective and subjective forces, the microcosm and the macrocosm. Not to make it too mystical.
Well, so far, my past guests, there's been a lot of mysticism involved, because I think it is time that we see creativity with it in a divine lens, because that's what I really believe it is. The art of creation is divine. That's why, like in the past cycles, women were put in the foreground of society because they were seen as these divinity that could creatively bring something to life. It was the most beautiful thing and the most mystical thing ever. Like, where does this new entity come from out of the inner self of the woman? And now it's been kind of lost. I think this creativity becomes a means to make money, to make fame, to become popular. But I think this old knowledge needs to come back to the surface.
So isn't that the age-old struggle of most artists? How to be authentic with your art and at the same time make a living and not alienate too many people in such a way. Like even, Johann Sebastian Bach, he's writing music for church and religious music, because that was the thing of the day, right? And many composers resorted
still
to
in that era, though.
And some artists would be commissioned for sculptures, like Leonardo da Vinci or Michelangelo, or these sort of people. What was nice about da Vinci is that he exploited this. He said, okay, I'm going to do something that people can relate to, but at the same time, I'm going to embed in that a deeper message, which is available in plain sight for those who have eyes to see it. So he kind of found this solution to expressing himself creatively and still managing to fulfill that very materialistic, practical need.
It's to
make a business.
The conspiracy of Sir Francis Bacon, who would have embedded through the Shakespearean acts all these symbolism and all these hidden secrets, because he was owning a press, so he could actually embed in the types like some symbolism. There's a lot of research on that, because there's a lot of secrets that needs to be conserved and preserved, but that are too shocking to be revealed in plain sight. And that's what Leonardo da Vinci did also, I think, just encode his paintings and through sacred geometry and through different symbolism. But I think now, where we're the times we're living, it is not necessary to encode these things anymore. No one will get killed. Anyways, it depends where, I guess, but there is more opportunity to be authentic with whatever inner world we have and show it to the world. And I think more than ever it's important to do that as well. It's like we should be encouraging that. So,
well, there's a rise of authoritarianism all over the world, so that's going to be a difficulty.
Well, I think it is a time of confrontation that we're heading to, and we are right now. But it will be, even though we're not authentic. That's my point. Might as well be authentic.
Yes, I think art can only flourish in healthy democracies, because every healthy democracy preserves values like freedom of speech, which means diversity of opinion, diversity of perspective, and all of that becomes uprooted if you're living in an authoritarian state. And you're going to have certain artwork that fulfills the mission of the mission statement of the state, and that which does not. And therefore, you have to you experience this collective stifling of creativity. which also
Sure.
interferes with the ability to find practical solution to real life problems like climate change and our environment and the food that we eat and racism and all these pending issues.
Yeah.
So that I really admire artists who find some way to hint at or contribute to these global solutions.
To the dialogue and to the like informing people to their art.
Right.
Yeah, I think that's necessary, and I feel like artists that are under the spotlight often they have had this dialogue. And anyways, in contemporary visual arts, you find a lot of people that are in the big institutions that do touch upon these subjects and infuse them in their art to bring awareness to them. But that's more the practical. I feel like the physical aspect, politics and but mentalities in the spiritual sense, I think they don't change necessarily through physical action. They can, but I don't think that's the quickest way to get there. I feel like symbolism, sacred geometry, all these things that talk directly to the program of the psyche is the fastest way to change mentalities. And I think that's why it's so important to bring awareness to these, how symbols work and how you can use them and infuse them and code them in your art,
right,
to heal the collective. And like an artist I know, she would record harmonic sounds to infuse in her music so that it does something, it resonates to a certain specific chakra and activates it in some ways.
Sure.
Just bring back this old
knowledge. Or even if it's not necessarily a highly authentic expression, even just for advertising, the subliminal messages that are being absorbed and what kind of impact they have.
Yeah, exactly.
Sure, you're selling a product, but at the same time, through selling that product, what kind of principle are you encouraging?
Yeah.
And even that has an effect on collective psyche, even if you're not thinking about it, because we're exposed to these messages all the time, whether it's in magazines or...
That's the thing. People have been using this against us to create desires that make us want something we don't need. So why not use these tools to enhance the collective happiness, the collective freedom, the collective, through our art. Like artists, we have the power to do that because we create as a profession. So why not take advantage of this to bring something positive to people that will receive our art?
That's a fruitful and resourceful way to think of it. But then again, there's so many artists who are just overly concerned with their own inner life that to hell with the rest of the world, I just want to get this out of my system.
Yeah, and that's fair. That's part of their own process. But I think even with this podcast, I want to showcase the artists that have gone through this and can inspire other artists to get to this level where you can
Exactly, because there's a spectrum of different type of human beings, there's a spectrum of different kinds of artists. So you want to find a way to make alchemy out of the art in a way that covers both grounds, the individual and the collective, which is the ideal. Because at the end of the day, even if you create your art in a way that's absolutely selfish, if other people are going to witness it and exposed to it, it's still having some kind of social effect, and you're one little stream contributing regardless to the collective stream.
Yeah, but is it empowering the people that see it, or is it like restricting them? That's something we can ask. For example, a lot of marketers are geniuses, and they're creative geniuses, and they create something that is so good that you want to buy it. But is it empowering people, or it's making their inner desires activated so that they crave something they don't need and chase it all their lives? So that's what I'm saying. There's both sides to it, and we can use this powerful tool.
Yeah, something that's catchy and commercial, but at the same time authentic and has that heart of an artist that's present. But you see less of that when most of the pop music is just for the sake of consumerism and entertainment.
And radio, entertainment.
Yeah. Which is a shame, because there is a real art behind finding that balance between having something that's catchy, but at the same time authentic and touches the heart and mind, and has a real message to transmit.
That's true.
Or even using some sophisticated language that's at the same time catchy, which is another kind of balance to strike, where you're actually using something sophisticated, but you're making it sound smooth and natural and catchy and tasteful.
Yeah.
But the music industry will not permit too much of that. Or other industries, I'm sure, like paint.
If we just to conclude, what do you wish, like, that once your album is is released, what do you wish people to retain from the experience of your album?
A sense of vastness, a curiosity to explore, an awareness of the conflict of what it means to be human, and how that's...
Like a relatedness, so that they can relate to it?
Yes, absolutely. And I suppose to find your suffering precious in a way, because that's it is your guru if you learn how to listen to it and pay attention, instead of shying away from that suffering, like we were talking about earlier, about conscious suffering.
Yeah.
So for me, the whole album is an expression of that.
Okay.
And once the suffering becomes conscious, then there's an opportunity to liberate oneself.
Becomes your teacher, like,
Right.
you can learn to decipher what it's trying to communicate.
Right, but that's why I wanted this album, this idea of hanging in the balance, to be, even there's sections of it where, you know, it's the same passage but played backwards and they're both playing at the same time, or things like this. I really wanted that tension between opposites to be present. I guess the message is try to understand how things complement each other so that you can appreciate the contrast.
Yeah. And not be like a victim of it.
And not be one-sided about it. Which is, I guess, that sense of vastness, that you go through the struggle but you can also transcend it. And I'd like this album to be a reminder of that. It's what I was going through.
Yeah, it's very useful. I'm sure a lot of people will benefit from this awareness. And I like to ask this as a final question, like, is there a question you wished I had asked you, or a message you could have for the people watching this podcast that could, in these changing times where a lot of suffering, a lot of tensions are going on within us and without us, anything that you think people could benefit from knowing or for hearing from your personal experience, or just something that you feel is important to be said?
Love yourself. It's hard to truly love yourself when you're so preoccupied by your environment and you're struggling just to make ends meet, especially with this unstable economy. You tend to forget what are the fundamentals of one's well-being, and that there are roots to well-being. But if you cannot love yourself, how will you allow that love, which is a resource that exists within you, to be extended beyond yourself? So it just seems like everything is destined to destruction, and we're all going to die, and death is an inevitable reality. So how to be resourceful with this being? For me, love and compassion is a big part of that answer. But that doesn't come without self-knowledge.
So to fully love yourself, you need self-knowledge.
Certainly.
And self-knowledge, I guess, will also connect to like the mindfulness technique you said earlier.
Right.
Be mindful and start observing how you react to your environment in the present time as you're going through your daily activities.
Right. Self-observation will elevate anything that you do, whether it's artistic or otherwise.
And help you love the parts of you that you're not aware are there also.
Sure, but you know, you can't force this love into being. First you have to uncover it through this inner eye, this third eye of perception, let's call it, where you can see yourself clearly in order to understand the meaning of this experience. But first you have to see, there has to be vision. So sure, I said love yourself, but it's hard to love yourself when you cannot see yourself.
Yeah.
So first there must be a seeing, and self-observation for me is the key to that. So it certainly transformed my life. So I'm definitely going to recommend it as part of the answer to this question. I wish it was practiced more often. But then again, I think there's also a lack of education when it comes to how do you open doors to this inner world?
Yeah.
How do you go about it, even if you have an interest? Even if your interest is very sincere, there's still these, your brain is very resistant to restructure itself. Your nervous system has learned a certain way of being. So there's not just psychological forces to be concerned about. There's even physical forces that stand in the way, which I guess yoga has managed to address with things like posture.
And on my platform on rosenbra.com, I do have free resources that I filmed. So like I have my full breathwork sequence that for me has helped tremendously in times of stress to like calm the mind so that you can have the possibility of observing yourself. And now I'm releasing also a relaxation technique that's in 3 parts that brings you so deep that you kind of forget about your physical pain, and then you can transcend it for a moment at least. So I'm trying also to put these resources free on YouTube and on my website, and I know you also teach these things directly to people. Where can people find your work, and if they want to work with you as well?
They can reach me on Instagram, social media, Facebook.
What's your Instagram handle?
The Egyptian Magician.
Okay.
Used to be Amir Mourad Music. Might change again, I don't know.
Okay.
And then there's also the shunyayoga.ca, which is just a website.
Okay.
And
that's for your meditation and
right.
And guiding.
Yeah. I'm around.
Okay. Cool. Well, thanks for this talk, and this was very insightful.
Thanks, I enjoyed it.
And thank you guys for just tuning in, and we'll have a few more to come. I don't know when this will air, but probably in the beginning of January. So see you on the next episode. And thanks.
See you later.
Thank you guys for watching. I hope you guys enjoyed this very interesting podcast. Anyways, it was for me filming it. Just the conversation we had was very insightful, so I hope it was for you guys too. And just to keep you updated on the Rosenbra projects that are coming, I'm now traveling in France and London next month, filming season 2 of the podcast with amazing artists and creators, so you won't want to miss what's coming, so I'm excited. So I'll see you next month for the next episode.